Channel 5 presents Movies Till Dawn for your late-night entertainment. Tonight, Heaven Can Wait.
Welcome to Movies Till Dawn, a new podcast that's a safe space for filmmakers to talk about the fascinating and exasperating and always unusual and never quite the same thing twice process of creating motion pictures. I'm Raymond DeFilita, and I'm the show's Toastmaster General. We are back, broadcasting from the land of pandemia, I'm sorry to say. Let's drop that topic immediately. Let's start instead by discussing the date June 30th. It's a nice day, June 30th. It's the summer's just getting underway. The 4th of July's around the corner. There are a lot of interesting people in the performing arts born on June 30th. Among them, Susan Hayward, great actress. Lena Horne, great singer. Mike Tyson, pretty good dancer. John Gay, who wrote The Beggar's Opera. Raymond DeFilita, I'm born on June 30th. And there's another filmmaker born on June 30th, a filmmaker who I've admired since long before I knew his birthday was June 30th. He's the director Anthony Mann, and he's the subject of this segment of Movies Till Dawn. Anthony Mann was one of the great mid-century filmmakers. He worked roughly from the early 40s to the mid-1960s. And his career, it really sort of followed the curve of the Hollywood filmmaking at the time. He started doing very low-budget work and moved into slightly larger-budget B-movies, great film noirs like Railroaded and T-Men. He then moved into westerns in the early 50s. And the interesting thing about that is the business changed in 1950 exactly. That's when Lew Wasserman, the head of MCA, decided that the studios had it all wrong. It really should be the actors calling the shots as to what movies they made because they were the ones that people cared about going to see. And one of the early actors who benefited from this was James Stewart. And James Stewart wanted an image makeover. He wanted to be a Western star. And he decided to hire Anthony Mann to direct what was a breakout film for both of them, Winchester 73, one of the greatest Westerns ever made. I feel confident in saying that without hyperbole. And they worked together so well that they made a whole bunch of other Westerns that are all terrific. Bend of the River, Naked Spur, Man from Laramie, the Glenn Miller Story, which is not a Western, obviously. But Mann also made many other movies in the 1950s for the studios. Man of the West with Gary Cooper is a terrific film, and also God's Little Acre, which is a lot of fun. And then as television starts to dominate filmmaking and kind of takes a lot of the audience, Hollywood decides that movies need to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the epics start. Ben-Hur being really the kind of the signature late 50s epic from which a lot of other things sprang, and that's where Anthony Mann went next. He was actually the original director of Spartacus, but something happened, which you'll hear about, between him and Kirk Douglas. But he then went to Spain, and he made two of the great epics of that era, El Cid, starring Charlton Heston, and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I'm sorry to say that Anthony Mann died when I was very little, so I didn't get to interview him. But I did get to meet and interview his daughter, Nina Mann. And Nina is an actress, and she's a wonderful person and a good storyteller. And we met. It was sort of funny. My dear friend and collaborator, Jonathan Fernandez, for some reason, we were talking about my favorite filmmakers, and I mentioned Anthony Mann, and he said, "Oh, I know her daughter." And I know his granddaughter, and in other words, anyway, Nina Mann is the mother of Jonathan's friend, and he introduced me to Nina, and I said, "Can I please have a conversation with you about your father?" And she said, "Sure." And we had a great time, and that's what you're going to hear. You're also going to hear Anthony Mann himself speaking. I have some sound bites that come from an interview that he gave in 1967, just shortly before his untimely passing. He died while making his last film, A Dandy in Aspic, and the star, Lawrence Harvey, had to finish it. But he did give this interview. There's not a lot of interview material with Anthony Mann. He I think he felt that his actions spoke louder than words, which is a theme he comes back to a lot in this interview. It was done for an English TV show called The Movies. And they really put their heads together on that, didn't they? The Movies. Anyway, I'm glad they did it because we do have sound and picture of the man himself. The entire interview is available on YouTube. I just want to go back to the June 30 birthday thing one more time. I don't know why it makes me feel like Anthony Mann is sort of a blood brother director to me. It's silly, I know. And the thing is, though, that on every shoot at some point, you get really tired, and the director is kind of the victim of a lot of questions all the time. And, you get confused, you get dazed, you're exhausted. And when that happens to me, I close my eyes and I say, what would Anthony Mann do right now? Because he's my brother as a June 30th guy. What would Anthony Mann do? And he's remained mute. He doesn't answer me. But I somehow feel better asking myself that question and I get back to work. Anyway, let's go to Malibu, California in January of 2020, pre-pandemia. We're sitting in a large, lovely room with a big plate glass window overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's very cool. And let's hear our conversation with Nina Mann, daughter of Anthony Mann.
It's a medium which communicates to more people than any other medium in the world in sense of immediacy. It's marvelous to see, for instance, El Cid in India. I mean, they just adored it. They beat on the ground like mad, It was wonderful because at least it got to them, even though they couldn't understand a word, what was going on. And of course, this is really the medium because it's a sight medium. And this is the one thing which if I have anything, I would say is part of the quality that I have, and that is that I believe that everything should be photographed. It should be a picture. It should be an action. And this is what pictures are. And this is, Shakespeare used beautiful words and magnificent descriptions. I could have a shot of the desert and a twister going down the desert just before King Lear rides across it, before he gets involved in the hurricane. And the hurricane can be something it's all there. I don't have to describe it, because in one shot, I can tell it.
One of the things I remember from hearing from someone somewhere along the line was that my father had said that all the scripts that he was getting in those early days were lousy. That was a very 50s or 40s word. They were lousy. And he'd fix it in the shooting. So he was always trying to make what he got better from the visual point of view, is my understanding. And I think also they had very few sets, and they created atmosphere with angles and lighting. And I remember he did an interview once where he talked about what was exciting about what you could do with film is that you could have see the guillotine come down and hear the head drop in the bucket, but not see it exactly. And he also, apropos of that, felt that our audience imagination was far more terrifying than seeing it actually happen. To see the head lopped off and blood come spurting out was not as scary as your creation in your mind of how that would feel, look, sound.
And if you can make it all what the audience see as real and as truthful, then you don't have to say things. If you ever asked anybody in an audience what an actor said or an actress said, they would never know. But what they have done, or some piece of business, or some moment, they can tell you vividly because they've seen it.
I did remember seeing him sitting with scripts and drawing, there's the dialogue side and drawing on the blank page on the other side. What I think were the staging, but I don't know for sure. He clearly worked out what he was thinking on the other side of the page of the scripts that he got.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of input. There was a lot of visual of what I think he was thinking that he would record on the other side.
But it sounds then, because I'm always interested, look, there's really two ways you can do this. You can either bring the actors in first, see what they feel comfortable doing and plan your shots, or there's and I think it's maybe an older school way of doing it, which is sit there and figure out exactly where to tell them they're going to stand and plan all of your shots. It sounds like he was more of that school.
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I would suspect he did both.
Yeah.
I would suspect he came in with his, ideas, but he seems to be, I think he respected, the actors that he respected were the ones that were prepared. The reason why he liked Jimmy Stewart is he said there's nothing he wouldn't do. He would ask him to do whatever horrible things, being dragged through the sand and doing what. There was nothing he would refuse to do. On the other end of it, he was not a big fan of Charlton Heston. He said that what Heston did brilliantly was wear costumes. He would really carry it off.
Right.
And but the story that kind of goes along with that's an example of that is apparently in the scene where El Cid consummates his relationship with Shimane, and it's the first time they've finally fulfilled themselves. And the night before the shoot, Heston called my father, and he seemed very worried. And he said, during this scene, "Where's my horse?" And so, now the horse is a pretty big figure in the film, but it was indicative of kind of, he didn't have great positive feelings towards Heston. Also, he didn't like the way Heston treated his young son, who was there at the time.
Right.
And Heston clearly didn't like him because when Scorsese did a remastering of El Cid, and I went and I introduced myself to Sophia, who couldn't have been more gracious and wanted to know all about Anna, not knowing that Anna wasn't my mother but his third wife, and was just lovely. And then I introduced myself to Heston, and he said, "I never could understand what made that angry little man tick."
Funny.
This to the daughter.
Right.
I mean, why would you say that?
Well, first of all, he doesn't appear to be a little man.
I think he was 5'7". Or
was he angry though? Was he a tough guy? Was he hard on the set?
I think he was both supportive and tough, and I do know that he yelled a lot. Yeah. But how much of each, and whether it was, if you showed up with the goods, there's no reason to yell at you.
Right.
But if you're not...
Sounds like he was a disciplinarian.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
What was the first set of his that you remember going to?
I was so glad for these because it helped. I was remembering it was the Glenn Miller story, and June Allison. They were putting a glycerin teardrop on her face. And I just, that was just curious to me at the time. And so that was the first that I remember. And then there was a time when he was doing either Bend of the River or The Naked Spur, I'm not sure which. But we went on location for that. And some of the childhood things that I remembered was that the daughter of the producer was there too, and she and my sister got in an argument at who was more important, the director or the producer. That's whatever.
Who won?
I don't know that they won. I think my sister felt that obviously.
Well, I can tell you who the director of the movie is, but I can't tell you who the producer is.
There you go. There you go.
I've actually done all my films practically. If I possibly can, I do them. All on location. You can't always, but because there's a reality, there's a great, great sense of reality. Because actors they're not bothered by the silence of a studio and the scenery and so forth. They're involved because they have to run up a flight of stairs, or they have to walk down the street and the wind is blowing, or the rain is raining, or whatever is happening. They become more alive and more real because they're with the elements. They're battling the elements. And for instance, Westerns, of course, this is the great thing about Westerns, because you do all the picture on location. And if an actor has to run up a hill, he has to pant. Now, in the studio, it's very difficult for an actor to pant properly. He fakes it, but it's never real. His blood doesn't rush to his head. And therefore, he's less active. He's less vibrant. And all these things help in creating a film.
How long were you on that location?
I'm not sure. I was like 9, I believe. And that was an interesting thing that came up for me in going over your questions, was my experience of my father from, 0 to 12, and then it was very different from my experience of him from 12 to 24, because that was post-divorce. And my feeling that he left me and my mother and my sister, only my sister ended up living with him. So my daddy feelings shifted. I remember as a little girl, if he was coming home from work, running and jumping into his arms and feeling his rough beard, day-old beard against my face. And he would carry me on his shoulders, and, I would touch the ceiling and then discover that it was dirty and think, oh my God, Mommy's going to be mad, So, and when I was about 9.5, I had gotten a diary, and I tried to write in it every day, and I couldn't, and then he would help me and write in it for me, and said some very sweet things, about my darling daughter, and, so I remember clearly loving him. But after the divorce, I didn't know how to be with him. And I was uncomfortable with him, and I just felt badly all the time. I just didn't know how to be with him, and it's the part that is sad for me is that later on, trying to become an actress myself, etc. There's so many questions I would have liked to ask him. What was it like to work, with all of these various great actors that he worked with? How was that? But I do know that he was interviewing for a very close friend of his, Jean Black, and he directed one of her plays on Broadway, and he was auditioning on her recommendation a young actor. And for some reason I was there. I wasn't there for the audition, but I was, around. And when it finished, I said, well, what did you think? And he said, basically, all you have to do is tell the truth.
To 7 people, this gun was a magnet, a treasure, a weapon that promised life and dealt out death. For this saga of the West, Universal International has assembled a matchless cast. James Stewart, whose personal feud led to one of the grimmest manhunts ever filmed.
What was his partnership with James Stewart about? What was their relationship like, and how did they wind up pairing and making so many films together?
Well, I think, as I said, that they knew each other from each of their youth. And I think I'm not sure how Winchester 73 came about, but I've read this or it was a real change for Jimmy insofar as he'd been mostly known for light comedy. And this was really a change for him, which furthered his career. He was not going to be sort of tossed aside. And their relationship, I think, was first a working relationship. I know somehow I got connected with drawing pictures for Jimmy and my mother would give them to him, and then he would draw pictures and give them back to me. Unfortunately, I don't have any of them, but we had that kind of exchange. I think, like my father said, there's nothing you could ask him to do that he wouldn't do. So he admired him and admired being able to, say, go for it, do this. This, again, is an impression that Jimmy was not terribly generous financially. And
I think he was sort of famous for that.
Oh, yes?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
One of the great Hollywood cheapskates. Yeah.
Right. And I think my father, kind of resented that because they had done so much together.
Now, for the first time, the Air Force throws open its guarded gates to reveal the amazing story of America's top-secret striking force. Its earth-shaking power ready for defense at a moment in history when the world trembles in the shadow of the H-bomb.
Every day in Sacs of war, Colonel. Pressure's on all the time, and General Hawks is breathing down your neck. We never know when the other fellow may start something, so we've got to be combat ready 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Only VistaVision could encompass the vast range of Strategic Air Command. High as the stratosphere, wide as the world. The great story of our times, with the stars to match its stature. Jimmy Stewart and June Allison, the team you loved in the Glenn Miller story and the Stratton story.
The next one, I think, was Strategic Air Command, and I think that was because Jimmy wanted to do that, because Jimmy had been a pilot, in the war, and he wanted to, I guess, celebrate that or whatever. I do remember my father somewhere getting the comment that shooting against the sky was very difficult because you didn't have anything to track. And that was a challenge, as was the same kind of challenge, Heroes of Telemark, because it was all snow, and how difficult it was to get a sense of urgency, with that kind of a background.
A lot of you folks have read this story, The Man from Laramie, in the Saturday Evening Post. Well, we made a picture about it out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And here are some scenes from The Man from Laramie.
Man from Laramie, based on one of the most powerful adventure stories ever to appear in the Saturday Evening Post. Read by millions. Now brought to the screen by the star, James Stewart. The director, Anthony Mann. The producer, William Getz, who gave you the Glenn Miller story, Winchester 73, Bend of the River, and many more.
I think the falling out came, and I don't know the why, but apparently Jimmy wanted to do this other Western, and my father didn't like it or didn't want to do it, and he didn't. And then when Jimmy did it, it was pretty much a disaster. So he held that against my father, is my impression. I don't honestly know.
It sounds like you grew up knowing Stewart. Was he close within your family
too?
Or?
No, it was just that I would see him from time to time, and
it's interesting to me though that you mentioned him having an issue with how Charlton Heston treated his son. I'm not trying to dish or anything, but what was it that bothered your father? Because again, I keep going back to his childhood, which was so complicated and sad. It sounds like.
Right.
Was it something to do with that? Do you think?
Oh, that's a good connection. It may very well have been. I think he just felt that he mistreated his son. And I learned much later in life, his son grew up and was gay. And maybe Heston, sensed that and was trying to make a man of him or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Trying to teach him how to use all those guns that
Yes,
he
right.
collected.
Yeah.
Your father was raised in a very peculiar and interesting sounding environment. It was sort of a theosophical society, I think. It was called Loma Land. Can you tell me about that a little?
Loma Land was the Theosophical Society, is my understanding, was an amalgam of the basic tenets of all the great religions of the world. And his mother and father moved there, and he was born there.
This is San Diego.
This is San Diego, right. This is Point Loma in San Diego. It was a community that was totally self-sufficient. They grew their own food. They went to bed at sundown. They got up at sunrise. My father had never seen money until he left at age 13. It was a very insular kind of group. However, one of the things that they did, which I think was his savior, kind of like Ari, is that they built the first open air Greek theater there, and they put on all the Greek classics and Shakespeare. And he, at 5 or 6, played Puck in, Midsummer Night's Dream. And there, at one point, I was, exposed to seeing some of the images from Loma Land. And you can see this whole long line of centurions standing off stage. And you think, fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, you just, you put those things together. So I think from early on, theater for him was inspiration. The bad news about his upbringing was at 3, his father became very ill, and so his mother thought if she took his father back to Austria, that might help. And they left him there from age 3 until 13.
Alone in Loma Land.
Yeah. Basically, Loma Land, apparently, according to what I read, is that they kept the children separate from the parents anyway, but he happened to be left in the hands of a really, unfortunate Scots schoolmaster who, when my father would be acting out, would pick him up by his ankles and dunk his head in a pail of water until he knocked it over. So the water thing is,
and he carried that with him for the rest of your life. He didn't like water.
Yeah. It was interesting to me when I saw, and why I don't know why I favor the Furies, but in the Furies there's a moment when Barbara Stanwyck is acting out, and Wendell Corey grabs her by the scruff of the neck and dunks her head into a bowl of water. Now, according to Loma Land, that was their way of getting the children's attention when they were acting out, But
to traumatize them for life,
yes,
basically.
Right.
What was his escape, or what was his leaving?
His mother,
like?
his aunt came to visit him and sensed that there was something really off there, and said to his mother, "You've got to come and get this kid." And then she came and picked him up and took him to where she was living. The father had died by then, living in New Jersey. And it must have been overwhelming, because here he'd been in this very closed, situation in terms of how you live. And then you're in a completely different world, and going to school, it must have been incredibly uncomfortable. And he only agreed to go to school for, I guess, 2 years, and then refused to, and was, worked as a shoe salesman in Bamberger's basement, and taking shoes delivering them to New York, but getting it all done quickly so he could go and get involved in whatever theater experience he could, trying to get a job, as a stage manager or, whatever.
Having been in the theater, having directed in the theater, having been stage manager for some of the great directors like Jed Harris and Ruben Mamoulian and Chester Erskine and Winter Paines and so forth, and then gradually, then I was an actor for a while, and at the neighborhood playhouse. And we played plays like The Dybbuk, Little Clay Cart, things like that. And gradually, I learned enough about, at least I was learning about acting and about staging, and then I staged my own plays like Thunder on the Left of Christopher Morley's on Broadway and so forth. And then gradually, David Selznick actually gave me my first glimpse of the picture business in the sense that he allowed me to make tests for him, with all the great actors. I made tests for Gone with the Wind and for Tom Sawyer and for many films. And in this way, I was able to cut the films and so forth and so on. And gradually, I became deeply interested in films. In this way, all different kind of scenes and so forth, and I used to cut them and send them out to the coast. And in this way, I learned enough to be able to, so they finally sent me out to the coast.
He comes here to California, and he's involved with Gone with the Wind.
Right. He was hired to do the screen tests, which, according to the interview that both of us saw, taught him a lot about how to put together films as well as, directing. And I think, he was just always in California looking for any kind of work. And so when the, B films, noir came up, he was eager to do them in whatever way, he could.
Did he ever talk to you about his first directing, first couple of movies? They're very good and they're very cheap.
Right.
Yeah, they're really low, on the low end of the B scale is where it started.
Exactly. No, just to get them done and to get paid and to get another job. That was what was driving him, I mean, I think he loved what he did, and clearly there was a challenge in making something that was lousy into something that was good.
Yeah. I've heard that he would go see a movie in a theater and then he'd sit and watch it again.
Oh.
If he was, I guess if he liked it, he would want to see whatever they did.
No, that makes sense because we would go to the movies often, and I do remember vividly seeing The Red Shoes, and he was blown away by that. It was a wonderful, wonderful film, and I thought we saw it a couple of times. I remember going with him to see that. And this is an impression that he didn't laud other films easily. But yeah, we would go to the movies frequently. Yeah.
He's coming now. A portrait of him is forming to me as a very, very pragmatic individual. So I wonder if this question even makes sense.
What?
Did he have feelings that he expressed to you about which of his films he liked or disliked, that he was proudest of, or perhaps, or is this not the kind of way that he looked at his work? I'm curious.
I think the answer to that is whatever he was doing at the time was the thing that he cared most about, that he liked the best. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if it was lousy, it was going to be great, and I don't know, in that same interview that you and I have both seen, when he talks about, well, I killed more people in more different ways than anybody, and I didn't sense that he was proud of it. I do think that he got the Silver Spurs, which is an award for several of the Westerns that he did, and I think that pleased him, but it wasn't. And I think he always wanted an Academy Award, but I don't think it was what I'm not aware of his pride being in anything else other than another line in that interview was that it was done, and he had finished it, and he had spent himself, I think that was really a description of himself.
I don't think I've ended any of my films with any kind of exaltation. Really more tired, and he's done the job, and thank heaven it is done. That sort of feeling.
Tell me about your mom, if you would, and their marriage a little.
Sure. Well, he definitely wanted to marry her, and her father didn't want her to marry anybody in the theater, right. And she was super bright, really well read, very smart, and I think their early relationship, from what I glean, was terrific. What happened, which is also hard for me to understand with my father, because so many of his films are psychologically oriented, but they had one kind of life in New York, and she was basically supporting him. She was working at R.H. Macy and the head of the notions department, which, if you knew my mother, was great because she was always into everything being in its place. But he went out to California, and then she would say that she remembered him always saying, "Was that the phone? Did the phone ring? Was that the phone?" And what was hard for him in California, as opposed to New York, in New York, you walk the streets, you run into everybody you know, and you make connections and you get work. Here you had to wait until the phone rang, and but when she came here, they removed her thyroid, and I don't know why, but they didn't replace it with anything. So she went through extreme depression. And I don't think my father understood how to deal with that and wasn't able to deal with it. And, later, when he was making Serenade, there was a, beautiful Spanish actress, and that was...
Sarah Montiel.
Yeah, Sarita Montiel. Yeah.
There's a story to this voice, the story of Damon Vincenti, who sang his songs for everybody to hear. But two women listened with their hearts. One of them a devil with the face of an angel. Her evil went deep.
Oh, no, you are still afraid of the American woman.
No, Anna.
It is afternoon in the bull ring. A matador spreads his cape. A bull sees the cape and comes fast. His horns brush past. It is time for the sword. The matador or the bull. Now is the moment of truth.
And she lived with us for a period of time, or we lived with her, in Coldwater Canyon. I think she was nice enough. I think it was harder for my sister, who was older, and Sarita was all about, kind of extreme makeup and push-up bras and the whole thing, and my sister tried to emulate that, and I think it was a lot harder for her. The kind of curious thing about Sarita is that when they did get divorced, because she was Catholic and she was a big star in Spain, they had to get the marriage annulled so that, she wouldn't, be the wife of a divorced situation.
There's an interview with her
Okay.
from the 70s that I found
Okay.
online, and she speaks very, very lovingly of him.
I'm sure
and she says something that I wonder if this resonates with you. She said, "He taught me how to love."
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
What do you? And I asked this just because it was based on a rather racy novel of its day,
Okay.
God's Little Acre.
Yes, God's Little Acre. Great. I loved it.
God's Little Acre. Now you can see every one of its world-renowned characters. Robert Ryan as Tai-Tai. Aldo Ray as Will. Tina Louise as Griselda.
Live every warm, earthy moment.
Buddy Hackett as Pluto. Faye Spain as Darling Jill.
Share every lusty laugh.
Well, the first thing I can tell you about it that I loved, which was that I remember when he discovered Buddy Hackett, because he came home and he was jubilant about this actor. He was just fit to be tied. He said, "Oh, this guy, he's just too much. He's wonderful. He was just thrilled with having discovered him." And I certainly, at the time, we were living on Coldwater Canyon, and I would be with him only on the summer. So I know he was disappointed with whoever that board was that said that you could have so much raciness, whatever it was, that they didn't allow certain scenes, and that he felt that they didn't let the film be what it really was meant to be, and that was disappointing. But I thought it was, well, he worked with Bob Ryan. Bob Ryan he had worked with a lot. One of the things I admired about him, about my father, is that he used the same actors over and over again because he trusted them, because they spoke the same language, I liked that film a lot because, again, of the characters, and it was a very hot film.
Yeah. When his movies come on TCM, do you watch them?
Oh yeah.
Which are your favorites?
Different ones are favorites for different reasons. I love the Furies.
Here is drama as vast and spectacular as the sweeping ranges and towering crags of the lawless empire that spawned it, the Furies. And to film this greatest of all novels by Niven Bush, who wrote Duel in the Sun, producer Hal Wallace has assembled a superlative cast of dramatic stars. Barbara Stanwyck, Wendell Corey, Walter Houston in his greatest role.
You stop telling lies about me, and I'll stop telling the truth about you.
I've heard that one before. Now get. I killed your father in a fair fight, and I'd be pleased to do as much for you.
Do you want me to beg? Do you want me on my knees to you for his life?
I'd hang him anyway.
It's me you should have hung. Take a good long look at me, T.C. You won't see me again until the day I take your world away from you.
There was a period of time when I would see his films and I'd be looking for him. I'm trying to find, where's Daddy? Where's my daddy? And it seemed that the women in the films were strong, and I liked that he put strong women in the films. And so I'd say The Furies was one of my favorites, probably because I looked at it closely for Criterion, and I really, as an adult, got into it. I think El Cid is overwhelmingly beautiful. Just real, and the music. There's another tidbit about whoever the musician, the writer, who composed it, the composer for it. I remember hearing my father say, "Just make it great. Steal from anybody, but just make it great." And I had to laugh when Tom Hanks on the Academy Awards said, "Steal from everybody." Because you're basically learning from everybody.
Sure.
Yeah.
El Cid, The Furies, I know you mentioned to me before we spoke, you did the Criterion commentary. What is special about that, aside from the portrait of strong women? Why does that film speak to you? It's a terrific movie.
I love the look of it.
Yeah.
I love the look. I just like the it's a film noir Western.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I project that maybe the reason why he then started focusing a lot on Westerns was from that experience. Because it seems like film noir, Western, okay, this is good, Western.
Right, that's the transition.
Yeah.
But then he was supposed to do Spartacus, and something went wrong, as I think it sometimes often did with Kirk Douglas. What do you remember about that?
My understanding is that and this I did get from my father, was that Kirk Douglas wanted it to be all about a showcase for him, as a gymnast, as, a fighter, and showing off his body and being able to, and my father felt that the essence of the film was the story, not the gymnastics of it. And there was some other kind of thing, and I think this was Spartacus, that somewhere along the line, my father, I think Peter Ustinov was in it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Peter Ustinov and a couple of other major stars.
Olivier.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And my father had asked them, each of them, why they wanted to be in the film. And apparently there had been different scripts written for each actor that had scenes in it that were compelling to the actor, and the actor, maybe didn't want to do the movie, but wanted to, nail this particular scene because it was so intriguing to him. So there were just so much going on in Spartacus. And, basically, I think he was fired because Kirk Douglas wasn't getting the support that he wanted to do it his way. Mm-hmm. And he had the power at that time.
They shot together, though. Are there scenes of his still in the movie?
Yes, I think the first 20 minutes in the movie are my father's.
Oh.
Yeah.
Among our people, we have a word for a warrior with a vision to be just and the courage to be merciful. We call such a man El Cid.
And then, again, because Hollywood starts moving out of, Hollywood, he goes to Spain and works for this extraordinarily strange organization run by a great con man, Samuel Bronston, who did get these big epics made somehow.
They had tons of money that somehow Bronston needed to get out of Spain to the United States. There was some machinations about that, because they built to scale the Roman Forum. To scale. That was it. I remember I met my father in Rome before any of the shooting was beginning, and we went to the Roman Forum, what was left of it and everything. And then I guess a year later, I don't remember exactly, I walked out to this huge plot of land that had the Roman Forum built to scale.
Wow.
So there was money, and it was being spent hugely. But one of the things about that particular thing, and I was there for it, I just remember being kind of overwhelmed, was they have the scene of the triumphal entry into Rome with all the centurions and the warriors, etc. And because they built the Forum to scale, it was vast. And so they filled it with, all of Franco's army, dressed in, they used all of Franco's army in El Cid and in the fall of the Roman Empire. So there was, lots of stuff going on there. Anyway, so they had waited all day for the clouds to move, and then finally the clouds were moved, and then they called action, and the lions and tigers, and they were marched in along with everybody else, and the centurions and everything were taking their gold coins and tossing it out to the various plebeians, and all of a sudden all of the extras rushed to the side to pick up the gold coins, and the Forum was empty. And you can imagine, you go for this huge setup in the clouds and everybody and getting it all, and that's that day. you know. So
that's right. Yeah, and those movies, Roman Empire and El Cid, they're massive undertakings.
I think they killed my father, quite frankly, because it was such an undertaking, you know. And these were real people. This wasn't CGI. I mean, my resentment in seeing The Gladiator was there are whole scenes that are stolen, but they're just CGI.
Yeah.
You know,
this was all there. Yeah, there was no effects to any of them.
Right.
So it sounds like he shot all of it himself. That
Yeah.
he didn't have multiple units or.
No,
crews around.
I know he had Yakima Konut he used for some of the fight sequences, and he loved him. He was, you know, very admiring of him and his ability and everything. But for the most part, yeah, he shot most of it. And that was with Robert Krasker, I think his name was. Yeah.
Were you there for much of it?
I saw some of it. I mean, I'd seen
El Cid or both?
Both of them. Both of them. The part of El Cid that was not the shooting, but the looking for locations. And, you know, and then again, here was the period of time when I was not feeling really safe or comfortable with my father because of my, you know, I just didn't know how to be with him. And so we would be driving around looking for these castles, which was amazing when I think of it in retrospect, and seeing these beautiful monasteries and, you know, wonderful, wonderful locations. And I would fall asleep in the back of the car because I just, you know, wasn't able to be there.
Was there a reason beyond that's where the work was at the moment? Did he feel, for some reason, like moving on in life, disconnected from Hollywood? What made him want to go to Spain and have that whole 4 or 5 year adventure?
I think the job, what it must have been offered, what was offered to him. And I don't know the who's in that, and, you know, the job and the potential money, and that it was going to be, also, hey, there was Sarita. So Sarita had all the connections, and Sarita was, you know, she wasn't happy about Franco, but she was able to use her celebrity with Franco. And I think so that there must have been that when he got to Spain in relationship originally with Sarita, and then where all the other parts and pieces came, I don't know. But Bronston was obviously there, and Bronston was obviously, you know, the money source.
In the Nicholas Ray's biography, they talk about how the money continually almost ran out, and then they would show up again.
Right.
Do you remember the shooting?
Well, I do remember my father not getting paid, you know, and he would not get paid, and then they'd give him a Mercedes, and then he'd not get paid, and they'd give him something else. Yeah.
But he never quit.
No.
How do you feel? Why do you say you feel those movies killed him?
The energy that it took. The humongous amount of energy. I mean, you look at any one shot in any one of those movies, and just the putting together of it. I mean, it was an army. He was running an army, and it was literally Franco's army in many cases. Sure. And I think that the energy that it took. I also remember his last wife, Anna, saying that she could hear in his breathing. He had had a heart attack well before this. He had an original heart attack, and he no longer smoked. But, you know, I just think she was the one who said to me she thought that the second movie, that The Fall of the Roman Empire, and then when it didn't go well, or wasn't received well, was a real hit.
The Fall of the Roman Empire. Not just 2 or 3, but 14 stunning recreations of the empire to which all roads lead. Rome's mighty fortresses and encampments on the northern Danubian border. The great forum of ancient Rome, completely recreated so that its original beauty may startle the modern world. The Temple of Jupiter, where the Caesars became gods. The Palaestra, where an army of gladiators was trained. The vast chamber of the Roman Senate, where an empire's future hung in the balance. the mighty assembly of all the armies of the Roman Empire, from Britannia to Africa, from Spain to the gates of Persia, to pay homage to the greatest Caesar of them all. The battle between the death-sworn Persian hordes and the human wall of Roman. The duel of the chariots, a breathtaking clash between fearless men, the most exciting thrill the camera has ever captured.
I was in college when he was. They were doing a sneak preview of the fall of the Roman Empire, and there's a phenomenal sequence where there's a chariot race down a mountain. And it goes on and 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 on until people started laughing. And I'm sitting next to my father, and he said, "Why are they laughing?" I just, maybe it needs some editing.
Did they edit? I'm trying to remember the scene.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a brilliant scene. I mean, it must have been crazy to. I mean, I think they were trying to outdo Ben-Hur.
The chariot, yeah.
Yeah, because it was, and they go over a bridge, and the wheels are over the edge of the bridge, and and we've got. Horses and chariots.
This is making me want to see one of those
you have
again.
To.
Yeah, it's funny
to.
because I remember El Cid cut up and squashed in the TV when I was growing up.
Sure.
And then Scorsese
right.
Fixed it up and paid for a major restoration.
Right.
And then I saw it at the Cinerama Dome. I think this is like around 1992 or 3 or something.
Okay.
And it was wonderful because you got the sense of how really big and fat and extreme the whole experience, including intermission. It's like this is such an old school, wonderful, and I remember walking out in the lobby at the intermission and get more popcorn or whatever, and the guy like at the door, literally looked at me and he said, "They don't make them like that anymore."
Right. Yeah.
It's such a cliche, but I was like, this
it's
absolutely fits.
True.
Yeah, that's just
absolutely true.
Because very few people are exalted. Now in El Cid, this was a legend. He could be exalted. So then even though he rode to victory on when he was dead, strapped to his horse, there was great exaltation because this is with the great romantic kind of chronicle legends that were written in those days.
Yeah. And it's not just, of course they make huge movies, of course they make, but I think like you said, because it's clear there's no effects. The human effort behind it is so huge. Did he take criticism hard?
I'd say yes and no. I think yes. The way he dealt with it was he would ignore it, and he loved to play games and he hated to lose.
What did he play?
Oh, everything. He played cards, he played chess, he played checkers, he played, we on Saturdays would play croquet outside, and I just remember a certain joy in being able to knock somebody else's ball off of the court or whatever. But he didn't like to lose. He was not a good loser.
Did he gamble?
Yes, and he was bad at that. And he was something I read just recently because you had me thinking, and so I would go and research, and when he was doing apparently a dandy and aspect, he was very, very low on personal funds. He was gambling. I think was his one vice. He didn't like to drink. He didn't, none of that. But gambling hooked him. My sister and I would go with him after Christmas. He would go to Las Vegas and take us, and my mother was left home to undo the tree and to do whatever. And so I have vivid memories of Las Vegas and feeling really anxious, not knowing why.
You knew there was something going wrong.
And feeling just really anxious.
Oh, wow. When he, after Heroes of Telemark, he went to make A Dandy and Aspect.
Right.
And he died during its making.
Right.
Can you tell me any memory you have about that event?
I think it had been a long day. He had been working. I got this information from Anna. And they came home and they had a lovely dinner, and they, made love after dinner, and in the midst of it, he died. Which, in my father's estimation, I think would be the perfect way to go. Right.
Is there something that occurs to you when you think of him? Is there a moment in your life with him? Is there some memory that you hang on to more specifically? Do you remember him as?
They're all scattered memories. They're just it's like the laughter one. And they are in two different segments. There's my early childhood, and then from 12 to 24. No, I think, you're always longing to connect. I know when I met him once, I guess this was in Italy, and we were on a plane together, and he said, "You have a beautiful profile," and somehow that felt good. That was, because you're always wanting your father's attention.
If you enjoyed listening to Movies Till Dawn, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at moviestildawnpodcast@gmail.com. You can access these conversations at iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, as well as our website, moviestildawnpodcast.com. If you'd like to see some videos pertaining to the guests of each episode, please visit my blog at moviestildawn.blogspot.com. And please feel free to follow me on Twitter at ReelRDEF. That's ReelRDEF. All interview material and audio clips are covered by the Fair Use Copyright Act of 1976, in which allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research.